St. Peter Social Justice Ministry welcomes you to this morning's presentation by Spencer Merriweather. The Social Justice Ministry flows from two of the apostolic preferences of the Society of Jesus. We walk with the poor, the outcasts of the world, those whose dignity has been violated, in a mission of reconciliation and justice. That's one of the two. And we accompany young people in the creation of a hope-filled future. That's the second of the two. And so, as a parish, we reach out to accompany and serve those who live on the margins of our society, and too often, young people who enter the criminal justice system. So the St. Peter Social Justice Ministry serves the parish by studying the systemic causes of injustice in society and presenting educational forums about that. Our work is based in Catholic social teaching and in the discernment process of St. Ignatius. We meet monthly to pray, study, plan, and act. Jenny Cox, our co-chair, with me is over here. And Mary Stokes and Joanna Pacha head up our, where's Joanna?
Right here.
Ah, there she is. Where's Mary then?
She's ready for that.
Okay, so they head up the criminal justice priority group, racial and criminal justice priority group. So thank you so much. And I'll have something to say about that for about 5 minutes right at the end. So thank you, and the other members of the ministry who are here. Spencer Merriweather is a parishioner here at St. Peter. He's been a member of the confirmation preparation team. He's a district attorney for Mecklenburg County, having been appointed in 2017 by North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper, and elected to full terms in 2018 and 2022. D.A. Merriweather has previously served as an assistant district attorney for over a decade, prosecuting homicides, cases ranging from sexual assault and domestic violence to drug trafficking and homicides. For a full year, he was assigned prosecutor for 3 different drug recovery courts, where he served as part of a treatment team helping offenders confront addiction. Since taking office, he has emphasized victim-centered responses to domestic, sexual, and child violence, expanded access to restorative justice programs, and led the call for a family justice center in Mecklenburg County. So we're very honored to have D.A. Merriweather with us this morning. I want to begin with a prayer for St. Alberto Hurtado, who's the inspiration of our social justice ministry, if I can get this done. There we go. Christ stumbles through our streets, Alberto Hurtado said, and he saw Christ everywhere he looked. Christ has no home, he said, so he built one to welcome everyone alone in the night. Through our works, Alberto Hurtado said, the people will know that we understand their pain. And he always carried with him the salve of solidarity. Let us pray. God of loving kindness, let us see you as Alberto Hurtado did, a hearth by which all can warm themselves, a home from which no one is turned away. May we keep the fire stoked and sparking, the door propped open, the porch light aglow. Amen.
Amen. It really is a pleasure to be with you folks today. Being invited to talk about the work that I do at my church, my parish, is really meaningful to me. I can tell you, and I think hopefully you'll see over the course of our conversation today, that so much of the work that I engage in on a daily basis and that the staff of the District Attorney's Office engages in on a daily basis is motivated by conscience. That conscience has to be informed, and quite frankly, my church community is one of the things that informs my conscience. So it's extremely gratifying to be with you today and to speak with you. I have entitled this very loose and disorganized conversation as being the problems, the progress, and the push for something better. I want to start, however, with first things first, a couple of warnings. I will be talking about sort of the depth of my own experience as a prosecutor. And that's going to mean telling you some stories and talking about some material that may be disturbing. I know that as folks that attend a Jesuit parish, you believe in getting sort of in the ground of the material. And so I'm going to first throw a whole bunch of statistics at you because I was asked to make sure that I give you a good bit of data. But then I'm probably going to tell you a little bit about some personal interactions that I've had with people within the system. And so that's first thing. Second thing is that I'm going to drop some opinions on you today as well. And that those opinions really are mine. And in some cases, those opinions are really just going to amount to dreams. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a policy statement so much, but it does kind of give some suggestion about how it is that we can make our system better, the types of things that we can be thinking about to make our system better. Last thing I'll say is that I am in public service, so I'm used to being called everything but a child of God. So if for some reason you folks want to throw something at me or flag me down or interrupt me, please feel free. I'm used to it. If there's something that I've said that you have a question about, you don't have to wait to the end necessarily. I'm more than happy to either tell you that I'm about to get to it or to answer that question for you so you have a clear understanding of where we are. I will start here. This was November 27th, 2017 when I took office as district attorney, and as Clark indicated, I was appointed to that position before being elected to it. I knew a lot about being a prosecutor because I'd served as a prosecutor since 2007, but I didn't know a lot about the elected job. I actually was responsible for the dismissal of a lot of cases, but probably more important to this conversation, I was responsible for the conviction of a lot of people, including sending folks to prison. However, that's not the same thing as having your name on every single order that sent someone to prison. That was what happened as of November 2017. So after I knew that I was going to be appointed, but before I took office, I thought it was really important that I go here. This place actually isn't open anymore. This is Lanesboro Correctional Institute. It is in Anson County. It was one of our, I guess what you could call maximum security prisons. They call it higher security at the time. It has, like I said, it's since closed and converted into another type of facility. But I decided it was really important for me to walk inside of the correctional institution and see what's going on there. My name is going to be on all these things. I can tell you it's a really harrowing experience because once you walk past that wall, you're in an open space and you realize there's no getting out. And then you walk through some more walls and you see some interesting things on the inside. Now the light is a little bit funny here, but basically that is a solitary confinement cell. That cell includes the dimensions of 6 feet by 8 feet. The person who is put into that cell is placed there because they have been considered to be such a danger to the other staff and other inmates in that facility that they have to be placed there for a given period of time. They are asked to walk around and have their recreation time in that area. As I walked through the facility, I also saw that many of the cells that were not solitary confinement cells, but other cells, had burn marks around the lock. And so I asked the prison guard who walked me around what that was about. He says, well, folks would go to the commissary and they would buy batteries that would be for, radios, headsets, and the like. They would drain the battery acid out of the battery and light it on fire to try to get out of the cell. So I stopped for a second and I thought, what must happen here to the human mind and the human heart to make people want to burn their way out of the place where they have been held? When I think about the fact that a person is held here, and often, as I was told, that people are here because they are kicking, screaming, throwing human excrement and the like, what must happen to the human head and human heart in order to drive a person to that point? And as I find myself in a correctional institution with thousands of people, did I think that this was really the thing that was correcting me? Now I want to say, and I'm going to get to some of this a little later, that's not the same thing as saying that there aren't people who need to be held in custody. But I did think it was important for me as a matter of conscience to continue to ask the question as I was confining people and continue to confine people to institutions like this one. truth about our correctional institutes are as follows, that about anywhere from 50 to 75% of the people who are placed in our prisons, they're going to be released, they're getting out. There are a number of them who are there for serious crimes, and we'll talk about that later, including first-degree murder, which means that they will spend the rest of their lives in custody. But most of the other folks are going to get out within the year because of their sentence. So what's happening to them while they're there? And are they in a condition where they have been corrected by the time that they leave? And what does that mean for public safety in our community? 37% of the folks who are in prison suffer from mental illness. And yet, they have an underfunded, under-resourced system to treat that mental illness within our correctional facilities. 58% of the prison population suffers from substance use disorder. Now compare that with about 6% folks between the ages of 18 and 25, and 11% of the population over 25. Compare that to 58% of people who are in prison. That lets us know what a challenging population that we're dealing with within our correctional facilities. Now, when folks are released, when people talk about recidivism, the likelihood that they're going to come back, the likelihood that they're going to find themselves back in our court system, re-offending, which is to say that they are not corrected. It's 49% for prisoners, people who have been locked away, held in custody, which is different than for people who are on probation. We find that probationers have a recidivism rate of 37%. Now that's not as clear as I just stated. I'll explain to you in a minute that folks who have made their way to prison can get there a couple different ways. One, they've committed something so serious that in our law it does not give people a second chance to commit that crime again. And so they're like, we have to make sure that you're in custody now. Things like murder, rape, armed robbery, stuff like that. The other way that people can find their way into a correctional institute, find their way into custody, is for repeated behavior. The more things that you're convicted of over time, the more the likelihood is that they say, okay, well, at this point, you have had a number of chances at probation, had a number of chances outside society to correct your behavior. And so at this point, we have to try something different and get you off of the street. All of that is codified in our law as far as the scheme and how we decide, how judges decide who goes to prison and who doesn't, who goes to probation and who doesn't. So I'm not as surprised by this number, because this number for probation recidivism, these are going to people who are, a lot of times they've done something less significant than a murder or rape, and it might be only their first or second time being convicted of it. Not necessarily the first or second time doing it, but the first or second time that they've actually been convicted of it and gone through a process. 75% of those who 75% of those get arrested after release within about 12 months. So basically, if you're going to recidivate, you're going to do it early. These are the things that we know about the impact of correctional institutes on recidivism. What we have seen, and I should have said from the get-go, I'm talking largely today about what goes on in state criminal justice as opposed to our federal criminal justice system. And I'll be talking about what goes on in the state of North Carolina as opposed to what goes on nationally. However, I should also say that most of what goes on in North Carolina tracks what has happened nationally. So that's something important to pay attention to. In 1983, anybody know what's going on in 1983? Attitudes about crime, attitudes about maybe things like enforcement on street crimes, drugs, and the like. Tough on crime. Tough on crime. So this was like the beginning of that. Yes, sir.
Was that when mandatory sentencing started?
some mandatory sentencing. The question was that when mandatory sentencing started? And we began to see in the early 80s, maybe even a little bit before, where we started to see mandatory sentencing. About 10 years later, we started to see enhanced sentencing for people who are repeat offenders. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I sit in the position I sit in, that's not all bad. However, I'm going to give you the numbers. This was what it was at the start of sort of that movement in 1983. By 2009, in North Carolina prisons, we're looking at 41,000 people in prison. Now, you can always budge these sort of numbers a little bit when you talk about them over time, because I haven't even told you how fast North Carolina grew yet, right? So I will tell you that from about 1983, we had about 6.5 million people in the state of North Carolina. Today, we have about 10.5 million people. By the way, I always find it interesting that in Mecklenburg County, we have sort of a fraction of the resources across the state, and yet this place contains about 1/10 of the population. It's important to know when you start thinking about how our educational system, how our healthcare system, how our judicial system in this county ought to be resourced.
How does that compare to neighboring states, the percentage of people incarcerated, or even large city incarceration?
As I understand, well, I'll start with the states. If you look at the South Atlantic states, it looks like North Carolina ranks our rate of incarceration, so that's like basically per 100,000 people, ranks about 6 of 7. So the states I'm comparing it with would be Georgia, South Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, West Virginia. I think I'm forgetting something, but in Florida, excuse me. And so compared to those states, we're about 6 of 7. I'm not going to say whether that's good or bad, but I do think that, again, we are considering some things, and I'll get into why that is in just a little while. Today, we've got about 31,000 people in prison. Now, as far as people who've been convicted of felonies in North Carolina, basically you are sent to prison if you've been convicted of a felony and prison was the sentence that you were given by a judge. The other way that you can get sent to prison is if you have your probation revoked. That while you're on probation, somebody says that, well, you can't be trusted with this privilege of continuing to be on probation because you keep doing stuff. And so we've run out of options, so we're going to send you to prison. And so for this number, that represents probably about, I think the number's around 10,000 folks of this number. So actually, yes, about 10,000 people. So this number is pretty current as of last night. I can watch it, make sure. The Department of Adult Correction is pretty good about making sure that they're pumping out good information. We also know that the impact of incarceration is pretty disparate when it comes to race. As far as the general population versus the prison population, yes, sir.
If you can't pay your probation, you also go back to jail at that point.
So, not necessarily. As a matter of fact, and my experience is about what happens here. I have every expectation that if a probation officer decides to, quote unquote, violate someone for a payment issue, that the judge will consider the willfulness of their non-payment. In this county, I believe that there is a good appreciation of the ways that poverty can impact people and how if you basically are lining somebody up because they can't pay and don't have the money, but that's not necessarily a fair and equitable way to dispense justice. As a matter of fact, across the state of North Carolina, there is a demand that there are ability to pay inquiries that are made of defendants for a whole host of things, including whether there is willfulness to not pay probation fees. So. And please ask questions like that, because there's a lot of stuff out there you'll hear in a 6 o'clock news that maybe we can kind of clean up today. So that's great. Exactly. So actually, you have some wonderful journalists that are members of this church. So just go ahead and say that right now. They're all fair, and they all, as far as general population, 69.9% of the population in North Carolina is white. 40% of the prison population is white. 22.2% of the general population in North Carolina is black. 50% of the prison population in the state of North Carolina is black. 10.5% of the general population in North Carolina is Latinx. About 6.7% of the population in prison is Latinx. So we know that there are some vastly racially disparate outcomes as far as who it is that goes to prison. And it's important to think about what the impact is on our community. But I'll tell you this, a lot of times when people think about that racially disparate number, they say, well, why are the laws geared this way in such a way that they produce these disparate outcomes? And yet, and I'm one of the people who often will say, well, the law is actually the same. Since 1991 in North Carolina, we've had something called structured sentencing, which doesn't necessarily give judges a whole lot of discretion to create disparate outcomes. However, and so basically, this axis is about the seriousness of the crime. This axis is how much trouble you've gotten in before. That's not arrest, that's actual convictions. So if you're over here, you're probably going to be serving a lot more time than someone who just got their first or second conviction. And if you've just committed maybe possession of burglary tools, which is a crime, obviously you're going to get a lot less time and may even get probation. As a matter of fact, you're guaranteed of getting probation for some of these things. And then someone who's committed first-degree murder or first-degree rape. That's as it should be. However, you live in a community that is policed pretty heavy, and you have a higher likelihood of being arrested, a higher likelihood of having an interaction with law enforcement. What does that do to these numbers? If you live in a community where you are likely to see law enforcement have an interaction with law enforcement 5 times within a week, then it follows as a matter of data that you will end up over here. And so when you commit a particular crime, the likelihood of you going to prison for it is a lot higher. Again, that's not an opinion, that's just the data. So what's the cost of that? The cost of that to an individual, of going into custody for a given period of time, being separated from a family, not being able to offer to your family economically, or I am the father of a 4-year-old and my wife needs me at home like on the weekends, and if I'm not there, life is hard. So when you take a parent out of the home for a given period of time, what does that do not only to the family structure, but specifically what does it do to that child? What does it do to our entire community? All across our community, by the way, like people are looking for employees, starting with the district attorney's office. Can't find them. So what does it do when you take a large sector of our community out that is undertrained, that has had life sort of halt for them, that maybe there's some questions about whether or not they can be fully integrated into your workplace for whatever reason? That's a huge cost to the community. And again, that's before we get to the question of whether or not it's a cost worth paying. Sometimes it is. The ask of all of us, and certainly the ask of someone in my position, is that we at least acknowledge that cost and then make decisions about prosecution accordingly. Upon release, you know that folks are going to have fewer job opportunities, going to have fewer educational opportunities. There's some convictions where you can't get a student loan. So that cuts off access to education. Housing instability. Hard to get an apartment sometimes if you've got a criminal record. Social instability. Do you know how people treat folks who have a criminal record? It's tough. Now, the folks who show up to conversations like this one obviously are pretty enlightened about it. You're working hard to make sure that everyone is treated with dignity. Yes, ma'am.
What sort of wraparound services does either the local community or the state offer people who have been released from prison to help them with either job training or paths to actual jobs or housing? If they know there are barriers to housing that help them to transition over time.
Joanna, you want to take the mic for a minute?
I'd be happy to take that.
Probably repeat the question, but go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so the question was, what kind of services do we have here in Mecklenburg County to help individuals after they have left incarceration? I am a social worker at the Center for Community Transition that works with individuals that have been released. It is incredibly difficult after you have been released, if you've got a record, to get housing. Number one, I work with clients that have filled out 6 applications at $50 a pop, and they have limited resources. So to spend $50 for our rental application, when most likely they're gonna say, sorry, your charge, even though the charge could be 10 years old, typically it's within 7 years, but they usually go back all the way. And even apartment complexes that have multiple locations, you have to apply with each separate location. You can't just apply once. So it's a little bit of a money grab, honestly, with the housing. So it's very difficult for individuals to get housing. If you don't have a place to live, what happens, right? That's the groundwork. That's the hierarchy of needs. If you don't have a place to live, everything else kind of falls apart. Jobs, second chance employment is getting easier in Mecklenburg County, still very difficult. Most people don't want an individual with a record working with the public, working for their job. So that is something that I encourage anybody who is out here that has any jobs or connections with housing or with employment, please reach out, ask somebody their story. I have met some amazing individuals that have been charged with first-degree murder. And they are a lot more than that charge on a background report. When you hear their backgrounds and what led up to that charge, you think, oh, I get it. I might have done the same thing. It's amazing what you can understand when you hear somebody's story. So ask someone for their story. Give them the dignity of hearing their story, not just their charge. There are organizations in Mecklenburg. Reentry Partners of Mecklenburg County is an organization that's made up of parole officers, district attorney's office, public defender's office, number of nonprofits. So there are resources. Freedom Fighting Missionaries did just get a big chunk of money from, I don't know if it's from the county or the city?
County.
The county, to help with housing. So that is gonna be a huge, that just happened last week. So there are things that are happening, because if you're not doing it because you care about people, you should do it because you're spending your taxpayers' money, right? It's expensive to incarcerate people. So the more wraparound services that we can give to people when they get out will save us money down the road from them ending back up in the system.
Thank you.
Yep.
I want to blow a hole in all that for a second. I will tell you, yes ma'am.
I just wanted you to comment about people that have been rehabilitated that aren't able to vote, that felons can't vote.
Yes ma'am. So first of all, felons can vote. They
vote.
can vote in North Carolina. What you might be referring to is people who are currently on probation cannot vote.
Okay.
And people who are currently on parole cannot vote. That was something that was a matter of litigation. The Supreme Court, I believe it was in April, recently reversed a decision by the lower court to allow folks to vote who are on probation or parole. That was reversed, so that's an issue. One thing I wanted to kind of blow a hole in, it is good that we have all of these resources. It is right that we have all these resources, reentry resources in Mecklenburg County. Funny thing though, because we have them here. So when someone is released from correctional facilities all across this state, what county is it that you think that folks get dropped off in. They get a one-way bus ticket to what place? That's right. Now listen, I love growth. I love new neighbors. I do. And yet, there's still a burden that we have in this community that is not shared everywhere. I'm not saying that I want to keep folks out. What I am saying is that there's no reason why these services that we have here can't be replicated in other places. As we talk about the challenges to rural economies across this state, imagine what happens if you have a workforce that is willing and looking for a way to be employed, and looking for a way to move forward, is able to reside in the place where they are from. But they don't go there because they don't have the resources. I think I've got like about 20 minutes left. I think I'm gonna make it, so we'll continue to go. We are stemming the tide as far as the growth in our prison population. That there are a lot of good things that are happening in our justice system, despite the fact that it certainly still has a whole bunch of flaws and a whole lot of disparities. We have some local successes that we're proud of. Now, actually, he just called me this morning, but the person that hired me to the DA's office, Peter Gilchrist, who was a DA for 36 years, may have been the national father of diversion programs. And the first one that he came up with was something called deferred prosecution. Before it found its way into our law, he was allowing folks for particular types of charges, what he would refer to as sort of petty charges, allowing them to commit to a number of conditions that they would meet, including restitution to victims, often in property cases. And upon those satisfactions of those convictions, he dismissed the case. This design was represented all across the state, or it was replicated all across the state, replicated across the country. So much so that we actually don't have to use this as much anymore, because now we've got some better ways of doing it, like diversion programs, where we are sending people directly into service providers across our community, making sure that people are maybe getting a lesson about cognitive behavioral therapy and cognitive behavioral intervention, or people who need substance use treatment that they are getting. Yes, sir.
Just out of curiosity, people that are eligible for deferred prosecution or diversion programs, would they also be eligible for prison, or are we talking about a different category of people?
We typically are talking about a different category of people. Remember that chart that I showed you? Those folks often are going to be first-time offenders.
Okay.
They're going to have a clean record, and the charge that they are that for qualification is going to be sort of a lower level. It could be a felony, but it's a lower level felony.
But
And
this
so the opportunity to keep that felony off your record is something that still allows you to have a number of rights and privileges.
okay,
that
but it
you
doesn't
would
meet that prison. Okay.
That's correct. That's correct. Recovery courts. Again, as far as North Carolina is concerned, that's something that originated here. And the idea behind that is, instead of sending people, in some cases, to prison, it could even be for repeat offenders, that you bring people into a court. It's the one component of our justice system where I'm sitting down with a criminal defense attorney, and I did this for probably a good 2 years of my career, with a judge, a defense attorney, a treatment counselor. And all of us are not thinking about the adversarial system between defense and state. We are thinking about how it is that we make this person healthy. It's that this idea that originated from the recovery court or treatment court idea is something I'll talk about sort of at the end of this presentation. That's kind of where we want to be and where we need to be. But the setup of our system makes that very difficult. But we're proud of the fact that that exists. What's funny, however, is, for reasons that I'll bring up a little bit later, there are some disincentives to entering into our recovery courts right now. The law has tried to be a lot more progressive when it comes to how we treat mental health, mental illness, how we treat substance use disorder, and so it doesn't necessarily make people go through the rigor that exists within our recovery courts. So a defense attorney whose job, whose commitment, obligations to look out for their client's rights and make things as seamless as possible for that person might say, well, you could go in this 18-month recovery court system. If you mess up, they're probably gonna have you dry out in custody for like a day and a half. Or you could do this statutory thing which says that basically if you just kind of stay out of harm's way, they're gonna dismiss the charge in about 12 months. Which do you choose? And so that disincentivizes people actually doing the thing that very well may put them on a better road to recovery. And so there's stuff like that that comes up in the system all the time that we still struggle to get right. Juvenile diversion. I'm calling it diversion, but what it actually is deflection. What this means is that people, juveniles, first of all, their records are generally confidential. And so if a juvenile does something to you or your property, you have a right to know about how that case is being resolved, but it very well may never end up in court. It very well may be that we are blessed with a well-resourced law enforcement agency that decides, you know what, we're gonna take this kid for a number of months, gonna have him come in on weekends, and we're gonna work with him. That happens more in this jurisdiction than people know. And literally, there are cases that people will call our office about from time to time and never came to our office because of this program, juvenile diversion. This is not small. As a matter of fact, this even happens, it might scare you, but it even happens on some sexual offenses. Because some of the quality of those sexual offenses are things where it's not kids who are actually predators, but kids who just don't have a good understanding of their being and their biology. And so you've got people who are diverted into programs that work with them and help them and deal with sort of the root causes. One thing that we have done in the district attorney's office that I took a little bit of a beating about was the reprioritization of prosecution. I was a drug prosecutor for about 3 years. Some of that included working with our treatment courts. Some of that included the prosecution, and still includes the prosecution of folks who are trafficking and selling in drugs and basically selling poison to people and making folks sick. We're going to continue to do that. What I was less inclined to do is to hold a case open for 3.5 years and continue to proceed on simple possession cases involving drugs, and then have the jury look at me and say, you know, I could have sworn like 100 people got killed in Charlotte last year. Why are you guys prioritizing this over some of those violent crimes and some of those property crimes and other things? So that made me have to think about how it is that we prioritize our cases. And so we have tried to channel more of our possession cases into direct recovery providers and service providers, as opposed to carrying those cases in court. Doesn't mean that if you get called to jury duty, you won't occasionally see one of them, but usually that's going to mean that there was a gun that was near. Usually that's going to mean that it was someone who was a repeat offender within a particular neighborhood, and we believe that they're involved in some other stuff. And so getting accountability on that particular charge is really important. But we just have to make sure that we're giving appropriate priority to these cases. And compared with some of the other pressing issues that we have in Mecklenburg County, this is sort of where we landed. Expansion of expunction. We talked about the importance of keeping people's records clean while we can. That means that people get jobs, people get housing. And I talked about deflection as far as juveniles, but there's some other jurisdictions across the country or across the state we haven't found the right fit just yet in Mecklenburg County. But there are other police departments that basically are saying on the street, listen, buddy, I'm not gonna send you to court. You and I are gonna work this out. We're gonna get you in a program. And if that doesn't happen, then maybe a number of months later, we might go to court with it. But these are police on the street who are doing what they can to try to keep cases out of court. That is happening. These are good things and these are successes. Yes, ma'am.
Does the prevalence of fentanyl make a difference in the prioritization?
It does. Right now, fentanyl is an extreme problem in our community. I have people who literally have protested my office over mass incarceration, who are asking me to put more people in prison because of the fentanyl that's being sold in the community. I'm happy to say that we are taking it extremely seriously, and yet can't necessarily go after the people who are sick, because that's not actually hasn't demonstrated that it's an effective strategy. That I'd rather go after the person who's selling that poison. I'd rather go after the person who's trafficking that poison and moving it across our community than the person who just all of a sudden gets caught with it. Obviously that's a risk to their lives. I want to catch it early as opposed to catching it just on the street in somebody's pocket. One of the questions that I have is whether or not, I've talked to you about the wonderful ways in which court system is intervening. Is that the best way? I've described to you a whole bunch of healthcare problems and social services problems. By the time that I get a case, someone has been involved in stuff for years. By the time that I'm actually able to get that case to court, right now there's a 6-year wait to get a homicide in front of a jury. About a 4-year wait for rape cases. The system doesn't move quickly, it doesn't move fast. And usually when you've got these sort of issues, you gotta move fast. You wanna get somebody off dope, you gotta move fast. You wanna address someone's criminal behavior and make them understand that it puts them on a road for bad stuff, you gotta move fast. And our court system isn't necessarily set up that way. It's meant to be deliberate, even when it's fully resourced. So let me tell you, we're far away from that. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. The Justice Reinvestment Act in 2011 changed some things in North Carolina. We have habitual sentencing. I talked about repeat offenders and how there was enhanced sentencing for them. That the JRA reduced sort of the heaviness of those sentences. It was that people were basically sentenced like they shot somebody, even for possession of a controlled substance, like a crack rock. That if they had that kind of record, which got them to that place. We don't do that anymore. That system changed under Justice Reinvestment, means fewer people sent to prison. Reduced likelihood of probation violations. Now, we've limited the reasons why someone can be revoked from probation, so that number of people who are in prison because they have violated their probation, that's been reduced. Scaled back prison sentences on a variety of offenses. Locked off entire months on a number of sort of mid-level felony crimes, and required diversion of discharge for a lot of those possession cases. This is what I was saying, kind of undercuts a little bit of the recovery reports. All of these things you can imagine added up to a significant reduction in prison population. This is where the incarceration rate was in 2011. By the time you get to 2020, it's more than cut in half. Okay? Probably haven't heard a lot about that, but that's actually what's happened here. This also is imperfect, but the incarceration rate by race has also dropped significantly among African Americans. Talking about a per 100,000 at 824 rate in 2011. After Justice Reinvestment, dropped to 529. It's held pretty steady for Latinx and white folks, but for African Americans, it's dropped significantly.
Quick
So-
question, Spencer.
Sure.
Is that incarceration rate just prisons? Because you talked about prisons early, but people are in county jails, people are in the system by parole and probation. How many people are kind of in this system? How many are in county jails in North Carolina?
Well, I'll say that right now the number I looked at last night is 107,000 people are in our justice system, either on probation, parole, or prison. The jail number is not one that I have because it is one that's done by county. Most people aren't serving sentences in jail. Most times jail, and people often use jail and prison, yeah, thank you, sorry, it's been a long night. They're not the same thing. Jail is really meant to hold people who it's believed that they cannot be released as they wait for the resolution of their case. Now, I'm not stupid. I know that there's a lot more people that you look at and you're like, oh, well, this person is released. I'm hoping that my office is in a place now where we're making arguments to keep people in custody only where we believe that person really is a threat to public safety. Now, it might seemingly be for something minor, but it may be something that we know about their history, and just keep it in there. Right now, in Mecklenburg County, for a community of 1.1 million people, jail population is around 1,200. Jail population. For that Justice Reinvestment Act, saved millions of dollars by dropping the incarceration rate that much. Where'd the money go? It's called Justice Reinvestment Act. Where'd the money go? Where was it reinvested?
Apparently not here.
There's that. Let's just fill a minute. Mass incarceration cannot be attributed to drug sentence. The first thing that people want to talk to you about is like, well, it was the drug wars. Well, yeah, a little bit. But for the most part, if you look at our jail population, it's not like people are in there. Well, first of all, there's a thing that often gets said across the state that nobody is really spending any serious time in prison for marijuana. Not now. There was a day, but certainly not now. Unless there's some other stuff involved. For instance, all of a sudden you've got, a we call drug deal gone bad, somebody gets shot, and the only thing that you really can, there's 6 people there, the only thing that you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt is the fact that someone had, 15 pounds of marijuana in their car, then maybe that's the case you settle on. But that person was involved with murder. It's just a little bit stickier to actually get to that. Everyone's afraid to testify. So that's how that happens. But even with our jail population as a whole, it's violent crime that is keeping people and making our prison population what it is. Now, I told you that I was just going to talk about state stuff and just deal with the green for now. This proportion nationally is the proportion of folks that are in custody for violent crime. And I would actually argue North Carolina is a little bit higher than this. And that's because the sentences are longer. The churn is taking place amongst a lot of the lower level offenses that people are coming in, which is why I gave you that number about 50 to 75% of those folks are going to be released that year. These people are not. These people are here because the sentences have gotten long over time. As we think about incarceration, you should also know that as far as like how the disparate impacts, that even if you take away a lot of our drug crimes and showing you basically violent crimes here, our white prison population is about 533 folks that are here for Class A felonies. Class A felony really is first degree murder. Among African Americans, it's about double. For Class B1 felonies, that's going to be attempted murder, first degree rape, about 1,600 folks. It's also about 1,600 folks are African Americans. Remember what our population numbers are now. But as far as the number of people, it's about the same.
Can I ask you another question?
Sure.
I see this statistic and I see the data up there. So are you trying to imply that there are fewer murders among whites or more murders caused by blacks, or are they all murders?
They are. They're all murders, sir. So the
why-
question was, am I trying to imply, which I'm going to get to in just a second. Am I-
Murder's a murder.
It is murder. Murder is murder.
Yeah, so what difference does it make in race?
So the idea is letting you know where the disparity in our population comes from. So if you see a different, if you see
I see a difference, and what comes to my mind is, well, what difference does it make? It's a murder. I mean, it's pretty.
You're exactly right. I'm
So
really
what difference does it make whether white, black, green, or yellow?
right. But the first slide that I showed you, I guess probably about 20 minutes ago at this point, was that there was a disparity as far as who is in custody, and I'm explaining that if these folks, there's more of these people who are in for life, and fewer of these people that are in for life, it will follow that your population you should expect that you should have a disparate, a racially disparate population based on what the charges are.
Right.
What someone's convicted of.
Well, I still go back to the question, disparate.
I mean,
I see it
we're
different.
gonna have people coming in for 11:30 mass, so
Sure.
if I could get
I'm sorry.
you to wrap up for a minute or two, and then I need to give Joanna some time because she's got some information for us to walk out the door with. So
What I will tell you, and I will go here. Two things. One, people do. I don't got a lot of stuff actually, but people do a lot of really, really bad things. Just a couple last month, my office convicted someone who did commit murder, killed their parents. They didn't just kill their parents, but they killed their parents in the presence of their niece, and made her live with her deceased grandparents for 3 days. They put her in a car, and they carried her away to DC until they ran out of gas on 395 in DC, and they said, if you don't arrange for us to get gas for this, they called 911 and said, if you don't arrange for us to get gas, we're gonna kill her. That person needs to go to prison. And they don't need to come out. That's my opinion. Now, there are a lot of cases like that, and I was prepared to tell you about 4 of them. I would never ask a victim's family who's lost a loved one to find restorative justice for that. To have an expectation that that person should be walking the street. To provide trauma to them. To make their lives unstable. To mess with their mind and their mental health. And it's not just murder, it's rape, it's armed robbery, sticking a gun in somebody's face, a whole host of crimes for which someone needs to be held. Breaking into your house. You ever had that happen to you? Find someone there? It's jarring. Your whole sense of security is taken from you. So much about our conversation about criminal justice has been about what happens to defendants, and I'm just telling you we need to bring some of it back to victims. And if you think that the experience of criminal defendants is the only one that's racially disparate, you'd be wrong. As a matter of fact, it's more disparate for victims of crime than it is for criminal defendants. Except this one doesn't get the attention. The last thing I'll say is I think there's some different ways that we can be doing this. That we are in an adversarial system. My job is not to have a client, but to find truth. I know that sounds trite, but it's actually truth. The defense attorney's job is to make sure that person has every single inch of civil liberties that the Constitution provides for them. And that is right. That tension, however, doesn't necessarily help us find the outcomes which correct the problem. Because maybe I can't prove it. Maybe I don't have evidence. But everybody knows it's a problem. And there's not anything that is set up about our system which is helping us to solve the underlying problem. There are places where people have go to prison for a very long time. But what happens there is something far more therapeutic and far more corrective. That people are actually treated with dignity. The place in which they find themselves is one that espouses dignity. That's not true here. Because you and I both know it's a far better argument to invest in school than it is to a prison. If you don't invest in how we correct people, you end up with where we are right now. So as you think about social justice, as you think about the criminal justice system, as you think about how it is that you will apply conscience to this problem, my ask of you is to make sure you're thinking about everything. Thank you for your time here.